Hi guys. This is my makeup session for Tuesday's Instagram Live, so I'm just gonna wait to see if a couple people jump on. It's kind of an odd time. I usually do Tuesdays at 8 a.m., but this is Thursday at 12, at 10, 12. So let's see if a couple people will want to jump on and have a little discussion. I will, of course, archive this on IGTV later, so you can watch it later. But the great thing about live is that we can get in on a conversation. And today I have kind of an interesting topic to discuss. Oh, hi guys, welcome. Have kind of an interesting topic to discuss after I go into a little bit of one of the characters in What the Night Sings, who is named Maria Büchner. Now, my German pronunciation is terrible, so you'll forgive me when I get there. But anyway, this is from my book, What the Night Sings. So that's one of the characters we'll be discussing, named Maria Büchner. So I'm just going to wait another 30 seconds to see if anyone jumps in, and then I'm going to jump in, and we'll just trust that whoever's supposed to be here will be here. It is absolutely wretchedly hot outside. I do not do well in this weather, and you can see by my hair, it's crazy. The humidity is driving me nuts, and I'm just trying to make it through to October is what I say. All right, and if you hear any chainsaws, they're widening my road and chopping trees down, which is really sad, but that's what that is. And we're listening to some lovely English, early English music right now, Palestrina. Okay, so now that we have a few people on, I'm going to begin. All right, so welcome to #Vesperisms, where we talk about characters and issues in What the Night Sings and use that as a springboard to talk about some other stuff. So welcome. So today we're going to be talking about Maria Büchner. And Maria is a friend of the protagonist, Goethe Rausch, her father, a friend of her father. And after Goethe's mother is killed during Kristallnacht, she takes them in under a false identity. I mean, she knows who they are, but they've assumed a false identity. They know each other from orchestral circles because Goethe's father is a violist and she is a famous operatic coloratura, or in the German Fach operatic system, she's called, okay, wait for it, a dramatischer Koloratursopran. Okay, I know I'm pronouncing that horribly and my R's are awful, but that's what she is. So she's one of these very high level, coloratura sopranos who can just explode with lots of different acrobatics, vocal acrobatics. She recognizes early on that Goethe has a singing gift, that she has what it takes to become an opera singer like her, and she's the one who begins training her. Goethe is definitely far too young, but you don't want to train an opera singer in that kind of technique too early because you can damage the voice. But because Maria and Goethe's father, Clemens, they feel the noose tightening as the Nazis begin to crack down on false identities of people like Goethe and her father, she cranks up the training just so that, first of all, she can distract Goethe and distract herself, frankly, but also to give her a skill in case she's deported. So because Maria is ethnically accepted as Aryan, she's ethnically German, but she's also famous. She's a famous musician. She gets away with a lot. But once they're found out, she herself is persecuted for being in a relationship with a Jew. So like Goethe, but under different circumstances, she continues to pursue music through the duration of the war, and it's all she knows. And similar to Goethe, it's a means of survival for her as well. So we can talk more about music and the Holocaust, which is a very deep subject, specifically in another episode. But this week in the New York Times, an article came out by Dave Eggers about the lack of art in the Trump White House. And it really stirred me. He goes into the history of support for the arts in the White House. And, I'm just looking at the article here. If you just go on nytimes.com and look up Dave Eggers, the article is called "A Cultural Vacuum in Trump's White House." Now, I just want to state from the outset that I am anti-partisan, so this to me is not a partisan issue. It's but it's a cultural issue, and I thought it was just very interesting. He goes through the history of performance in the White House and support for performance. For instance, the Reagans had performances in the White House of all different kinds of musicians every few weeks. And I remember growing up that there would be PBS specials that would be live performances from the White House. And it was, it was really like, I didn't realize how much that was sort of a part of the fabric of how I saw my government, how I saw the relationship between arts and the government. It was just a sort of a given. And they would give awards, presidents would give awards to artists and musicians. So I'm looking here at a photo in this article of President Obama and Burt Bacharach at a White House concert in 2012. But in this current White House, President Trump has not had any artists or performers in his office except for Ted Nugent and Kid Rock, who went together with Sarah Palin, and neither of them performed. So, and talks about how Trump has, the music that he's sort of, goes along with mainly has to do with the military bands. So I just thought that was a really interesting thing to ponder as we're in such a time of upheaval. And as an artist myself, and many of you being artists, I think we have to really kind of think about our relationship, the relationship between us as artists and what's going on politically or what's going on culturally. So I put up a little blurb about this on my Insta story earlier this week, and I just said, that I was having trouble creating art or writing or anything based on these current events and what's happening in our culture at the moment. And a fellow illustrator wrote in and said, and I don't want to give his name because I don't have permission yet, but maybe he'll jump on. What I said in my Insta story was that I'm just trying to focus on the work I have right in front of me right now and the people who are in front of me that I'm trying to care for and love, and trust that the work I'm making is going to affect people in the long term. So he said, actively pushing back against the darkness by continuing to work toward lasting works of art while presently loving and serving those you are in contact with is the correct response in his opinion. It's easier to spend one's time in protest to what we don't agree with than to go next door and serve your sick neighbor for a day. There's nothing wrong with making art in support of a good cause or as resistance to a harmful cause, but there's also something good about just making good, wholesome art, bringing great, hopeful stories into the world, and serving and loving those around you. So I thought that was really, that was such a blessing to read, that someone was feeling it in the same way that I was. And the question I wanted to kind of wrestle with, and you guys can comment or DM me, is this question: how do artists continue to create in a time of upheaval? So like Maria Büchner or like Goethe, for them it was more a matter of survival, but when you're called upon to be a creative person during a time of upheaval that's very confusing and can be bewildering, how do we do that? So when I was in grad school, I'd gone back to school after about 15 years or so of being an illustrator, and I tried my hand at lots of different types of illustration. But when I was in grad school, I realized, after some time of observing my classmates' strengths and different approaches to projects and things, that I'm not an editorial illustrator. I went to Parsons School of Design in the 90s, and at that time it was very heavily weighted toward editorial illustration, not so much toward books. And so I kind of picked up on that message that illustrators, that editorial was somehow, I don't want to say superior, but it was like dominant, because you open the pages of the Times or magazines and you see an interpretive piece by an editorial illustrator, and that's an amazing skill. So I've done editorial illustration, and if I were asked today, I would do it. Of course, I mean, but there's something about that quick turnaround of, like, I don't want to denigrate this at all. This is not, but I think editorial illustrators are so talented at these like clever image tricks. They're very quick, because the turnaround with editorial it could be 24 hours, it could be a week. There's not a whole lot of time to, deliberate, and like, because you've got to not just come up with the concept, but you've got to create a piece of art, for the client in a very quick amount of time. And I just don't have that quick instinct that my editorial friends do. It just doesn't come naturally for me. I'm a literary illustrator, and this is something in grad school that I was able to, hey, how are you doing? I was able to identify this in grad school that, yeah, I'm a literary illustrator. I'm not an editorial illustrator. And they're very different animals, actually. So both of us might interpret text, but one would be dealing with current events of all kinds, and one would be dealing with long form works, which, you could say are interpretations in themselves. So a literary illustrator might interpret an interpretation, let's say. A literary illustrator would interpret something that's, that a fiction writer has already written, or that they themselves have already written. The two, editorial and literary, are equally original, but I think that the reason I enjoy literary illustration so much is because I just need time to metabolize concepts into images that satisfy me and that I feel competent about. So just like there's a difference, and this is a whole other can of worms that I'm not going to open right now, but just like there's a difference between an artist who creates for the gallery and an artist who creates for the page, and they're both artists, so too there's a difference between the one who creates for a book and the one who creates for, let's say, the New York Times. So I've been asked many times where I come up with the ideas for my work, like, oh gosh, let's see if I can turn to this really fast. How quickly do I know where my pieces are? Okay, I'll show you this one. Okay, so this is a piece from What the Night Sings of a wedding gown hung on a tree and flapping in the wind. Okay, so where do I come up with a crazy idea like that without it seeming crazy? Because when I was younger, well, I'll get to that in a bit. Okay, so in a nutshell, my answer to that question is instinct. Now, typically when I'm working on a text or I'm reading a text, I'll get an image in my mind that's more or less fully formed, and I might thumbnail, and hey, how are you doing? I might thumbnail it just to make sure the composition is translating, but really the images kind of come to me fully formed, sort of instinctually. And that's probably a result of, 20 years of input more than anything else, but it's also the result of living heavily in my sketchbook. So I'm always working at ideas, and I'm like, I'm constantly ingesting, things in the world, right? So people have said that illustrators, maybe as opposed to gallery artists, are problem solvers, right? But I don't think that's true of all illustrators, and I don't think it's true of all illustrators all the time. I think of myself more as an instinctual interpreter, actually more akin to dreaming. You could think of it that way. So where does this leave me at a time of upheaval such as the one that we're in now? Now, regardless of your political affiliation, and I have no political affiliation, you can't look at the situation, let's say at the border, with children being taken from their parents and not have sympathy and want to do something. It's got to transcend your views, or the views your party feeds you, or whatever your views are on immigration law, right? It's the human situation at the moment that transcends the political situation, right? And as I said in my Insta story earlier this week, I'm seeing so many artists who are interpreting these current events with incredible sensitivity and with just really interesting problem solving, ways in my feed. And I admire that so much. But thinking of actually illustrating these things for me is kind of like it's like revving up your car and slamming into a tree at 85 miles an hour. It completely stops me in my tracks. Right now, I've told you guys I'm working on a new book. And as you know, because I write historical fiction, like right now, the one that I'm working on takes place almost 700 years ago. So there's been plenty of time to kind of see how things turned out and be able to interpret it, right? So, and right now I'm definitely working 12-hour days at the moment, trying to get a revision done. So my brain pan is absolutely full to the brim. So when I read the news, when I read the headlines in the morning, and I look deeper into these issues that are happening, they occupy more of a space in my heart and in my gut and in my emotional space, more so than in my mind or my hand. So I think that's because as a literary illustrator, as opposed to an editorial illustrator, I have to take time to metabolize. It's just the way that I, as an illustrator, am wired, and some of you may be that way too. Whether you're musicians or writers or dancers, some of us are able to interpret things quickly, and some of us need time to kind of chew on it, metabolize, especially painful subjects, because I'm very interested in the redemptive aspect of these events, and that hasn't happened yet. We're not in the redemption part. We're very much in the crisis and trauma part. And for me, that dealing with that exists more in the realm of personal action rather than artistic interpretation. So let me know what you guys think. How are you doing? If you guys are artists, how are you doing with all this stuff? Do you find that you're able to find solace in interpreting current events through your art? Are you directly dealing with subjects in the news? Are you able to illustrate those things, or are you interpreting them more through, through beauty or through any of these, other kinds of methods? I'm interested to know how people are interpreting or internalizing what's going on in the world right now. So that's it for today. Just send me a message. Let's keep the conversation going. Again, this will be put up archived on IGTV very shortly today. And it'll also be up on my YouTube channel, which is very, very new, and we'll see about that. But right now I'm just putting everything there and on IGTV for you to watch later. But always message me and let me know how I can help or how we can further the conversation. I've got some really exciting stuff coming up next week, which I will not get into right now, but I've got a giveaway that I've been talking to you about for a while, but because I'm working on this manuscript, I've had to hunker down. So I will talk to you guys very soon, and thanks for jumping in with me on an unexpected time today. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.